Hello, everybody. How are you? Back again with another Charlotte-based video. This time we're going to cover the Charlotte Hornets of the National Basketball Association. Of course, every city we do in this Spotlight series, spotlighting different communities and cities, we like to cover the sports. And, of course, the Hornets are a big high-profile team, a professional team in town, so we're going to go through it. We're going to take our time. We're going to look at how the team formed, what some of the highlights of its history, and just goof around. And I really mean goof around because 95% of what you're about to hear, this being a parody and comedy channel, is complete malarkey and complete nonsense off the top of my head. And you say, well, why? Why do you do it that way? Why is it so made up? Why is it so much nonsense? Why are you so crazy? And guys, I've got 3 different therapists. They can't agree. I mean, one says it's this, one says it's that. Finally, I took them all to lunch. I said, let's hash it out. Let's figure out what my problems are. What's the deal? Why do I live in this fantasy world? And then put it on video. And they argued so much at lunch, I just walked out. I still to this day don't know who paid for the lunch. So let's kick it. Let's kick it off. The Charlotte Hornets, National Basketball Association, based, of course, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Member of currently the Eastern Conference Southeast Division. They've also been in the Western Conference Southwest Division. They've been in the Northern Conference South North Division. And at one time, they're in the Southern Conference Northeast Western Division. It's complicated in the NBA. And one of the majority owners, if not the majority owners, is Michael Jordan. That's right, Michael Jordan, one of the best players of all time. They play at the Spectrum Center in Uptown Charlotte. The Spectrum Center, actually, a lot of people at one point wanted to call the team name based on the Spectrum. They wanted to call them the Rainbows, the Charlotte Rainbows, like colors of the spectrum. But then, the politically correct people got involved, and some said, well, what if some people like blue over red over yellow, and they can't get the color scheme right? It's going to be a whole controversy, and they just dropped the whole idea. So the current and, the team colors, current and then teal, dark purple and gray. And guys, teal, you might say teal, that doesn't seem like a ferocious competitive color, but teal is a good fashion color. And of course, fashion being so key in professional sports, specifically the NBA, it's turned out to be a real good decision because people all over Charlotte, they did surveys, 65% of the people in Charlotte wear teal every day. And it's not because it's teal day. It's not because it's a big teal manufacturing city. It's because of the Charlotte Hornets. Now, they were established in 1988. As I said, the other teams, as you probably guessed, at least 2 of them based on my T's. They're from Florida, were Orlando and Miami. The other one, Minneapolis St. Paul. Now, I don't know that they've ever named a team Minneapolis St. Paul whatevers. Okay, they either name it the Minnesota something-somethings, like the Minnesota Vikings, or the Minneapolis something-somethings, right, of any teams that are in that city. But the league announcement was that they awarded the franchise to Minneapolis St. Paul. I haven't been on one date where I asked the young woman where she was from, and she said, oh, I'm from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Because I would have said, well, wait a minute. You can't say it. You gotta pick one. Are you from Minneapolis or St. Paul? Because those are 2 distinctly different types of people. You got your St. Paulers, and you got your Minneapolisans, your Minneapolisites. So I think they just shortened it at that time to Minneapolis or whatever, and people were happy. But it was it was touch and go for a while. But now the Hornets have their own kind of varied history because they lasted from 1988 to 2002 in town under the ownership of George Shinn, who helped bring them to the city. And then they went to New Orleans. But at the beginning, there was really a question of, would the team be a success? And for the first year, 2 years, few years, the excitement was so high in Charlotte for the Hornets that people were surprised, and mainly because the at the time they were playing at the Charlotte what was it, Coliseum, something like that, and it was a big state-of-the-art place, right? So they had an arena ready to go, which is unusual for a lot of times people bid on a sports franchise and they don't necessarily have the facility. They had a beautiful facility. It was big. I think they had 240,000 seats inside there, guys. But the feeling was, well, what if this team doesn't get quite a bit of a following and only like 1,000 people come to the games, and then they're inside this cavernous place? I mean, the Charlotte Coliseum is big. The Rolling Stones played there. Every year they do 5 nights in Charlotte, and they would play a different part of the Coliseum every night, guys. That's how big it is. And then they would it was easier to clean it that way. They would just wait till the 5th show was over. Then they'd get a big bulldozer and push all of the beer cups and discarded lighters and all that trash out the back door. And usually there'd be some 2-3 people that partied too much and passed out and didn't realize they were in there, and they'd wake them up and they'd say, man, you got to go home. Here's a bus ticket. Go back to Winston-Salem. Go back to school. They're usually students, right? And so that's the kind of place where the Charlotte Hornets started, and the fear, of course, being that it was too big. But what happened was there was such excitement for the Hornets. See, the thing is, the worry also was that it's a college basketball type of town, because college basketball is so prominent in that area. And we all know the teams. Every year in the Final Four, there's 3 teams that are from North Carolina. It's not necessarily a rule, but it's just how it all falls down. Every year in March Madness, in the Final Four, you have 3 teams that are from North Carolina in some capacity. In fact, it's such a good college basketball state that there are major universities that have talked to the governor about possibly relocating the entire university to North Carolina, to a city that doesn't have a college. And the reason being that they felt like it would improve their college basketball program to such an extent that they could get into the Final Four. Because there's major college basketball programs that are big winners, but it just have never been to that Final Four level. So that's the kind of environment. Now, I know about this because I lived in Columbus, Ohio for 12 years. Now, what's in Columbus, Ohio is Ohio State University. It's a major college. Major college, like 70, 80, 90, 100,000 students and then in the stadium, they can accommodate like 350,000 people in the stadium. Okay? And so there is really, partly because there's nothing else to do in Columbus, Ohio. Very little to do. They've got bowling. There's eating red meat. But outside of that, there's not a bunch going on. So they don't mind if you have a different affiliation and live there. There's even some Michigan fans that live in Columbus. They try to restrict their movement so they can keep an eye on them. But the thing is, if you are, let's say, a Harvard University fan for whatever reason, they're good with that. In fact, they want to encourage you to live there because they know eventually you'll get sucked into the excitement of Ohio State football and other sports. I mean, this is the kind of place I would be in the grocery store in aisle 1, checking out my stuff, probably some bologna and white bread and maybe a carton of milk. That was my diet for 10, 12 years. And in my line, you'd hear somebody go, OH! And then from aisle 19, check out lane 19, somebody go, IO! They do this everywhere they go. You could go to Lapland, okay? You could go to Nairobi, and you're in some village in the middle of Nairobi, okay, with nothing but native villagers for miles, and somebody will go, OH! And then from across the savannah, somebody will go, IO! I mean, it's amazing. And so the point of it is that that's a college sports town. There is no professional team. I mean, if they went to the NFL and they said, look, we would like a professional NFL team here, The NFL would say, look, you got Cleveland and Cincinnati. You already got 2 NFL teams in your state in other cities that start with C even. So what do you want? And now Columbus has not done this. They don't want to upset the apple cart that is Ohio State football. But if they did, the NFL would say, look, you got 2 teams already. Now, they may be masquerading as teams right now. They don't seem to operate or perform as NFL teams. Either the Bengals or the Browns. They tend to, right now, operate as junior high walk-on style teams. Okay, like a third level, like an intramural league third level team. That's the way they're playing right now. But nonetheless, in Columbus, you have that excitement, and that's the way college basketball is in North Carolina. So what if, even if you have a professional NBA team, you'd think that the excitement would be there, with the connection, but you don't know, because not everybody's on board with college basketball teams that aren't winners. You got to be a winner. College basketball in North Carolina is based on winning. You know, they have teams in high school, in junior high. You have 10-year-olds that they will stop feeding them unless they win. Okay, so if you're a college player and you're a winner and you're a varsity player and you're a starter, you're a man or woman among the gods. And they give you these shoes that are 3 feet taller than everybody else because you're already elevated. And so people have to look up to you as you walk around campus. And in fact, they'll even give you your own microcell cloud conditions because your head's up in the clouds, and they want it that way. They want you to appear like the god that you are. That's just the way it is. So if you start an NBA team in Charlotte, would it work? Well, they decided to take the risk, and guys, it worked better than you would ever imagine. The excitement was so high. People wanted the tickets, and the day that they opened the gates, opened those ticket booth right there at the stadium, the Charlotte Coliseum, for the first few games, there was a stampede. And this is a kind of a small town atmosphere where people wave hi to each other, typically in Charlotte, very friendly. But all that went by the wayside when they were stepping over each other to get the tickets for the Charlotte first initial games. And people would just pass out. They would just get passed out and run over, and people would step on their heads. And the paramedics would come up behind because they kind of predicted that something might happen. And the paramedics would just tap them on the shoulder and say, "You're all right, man. You're all right. Can you breathe?" And they're like, "Yeah, I can breathe." "All right, you're good." And they'd give them the tap, like, just stand up and just shake it off. And they'd say, walk around a bit, shake it off. That's how the paramedics operated, because they wanted to instill some toughness in the fan base. All right, because they knew it was going to be a tough ticket. Well, they didn't know, but they found it quick that it was an in-demand ticket, right? So that was a good sign, and sure enough, the excitement for the Hornets was unbelievable. And you know, many of the games, I mean, they were setting records, guys. They set, let me see if I can get it. The initial season record, right, for attendance of an NBA franchise. Can you imagine? I mean, it's crazy. And not only that, they went like 360 games in a row sold out. And it's unbelievable. So, you know, the excitement was there. And remember, the place held 240,000 people. And the town at the time only had like 350,000 people. So most of the town was at the games. So if you had an ex-girlfriend that wasn't returning your page, remember the pager days or beeper days? You'd page her and she wouldn't return it. She wouldn't call you back and get in contact with you. You could see her at the game. You could sneak up behind her, just walk down and grab her popcorn. And you know that she always gets that double buttered popcorn. And now she has to go back to the concession because now you're eating it up in your seat. You grabbed it and you made a statement that she better return your page. Okay, in 1988. So that was the excitement that was going on at the time. And they still talk about it to the day. So what happened? Well, They did good. I mean, the very first game, well, let me see. Let me see. Oh, that's right. Originally, yeah, they were going to call it the Spirit at one time. But they had a contest, and Hornets was the winning entry. And that's also important because the Hornets themselves have a history in the area. The Hornets, the insect. Because there aren't a lot of wasps, there aren't a lot of bees. Hornets dominate the area. And in fact, as you saw in one of my previous videos, the Hornets were a big part of the Revolutionary War effort. Because Charlotte, remember, was a fervent backer of American efforts to leave the dang British overlords, to the point that, as you remember, there's a story of that British officer that tried to move into Charlotte when it was only like 6 log cabins. This is no lie. And they kicked him out. They said, take your British redcoat and hit the trail, bro. And sure, this is before the Revolutionary War. And then in the Revolutionary War, the Hornets of the area were supporters of the American effort. And they would do a winged formation and dive bomb on these British in their redcoats and hit them right in the butt. They'd sting them, bang, 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 kind of like artillery fire. A squadron of Hornets would hit right in the butt, and so their butts would balloon, their buttocks would balloon to 7, 8, 9 times the size. So here you have these British redcoats with these giant butts, and it stung like heck. So they'd run around. They didn't know what to do, so they put their butt in a stream. That didn't work, so they had to find a mud pack. And finally, that cooled off the stinging sensation that was driving them crazy. So here you had full battalions of British redcoats with giant butts sitting in mud packs near a stream, just trying to cool off their hornet-stung rear ends. And so the Hornets name is key to the whole area. It's got a history in the area, so it was a good choice. Much better than the Spirit. Okay? So, again, the team's uniforms with the teal as the major color were originally designed by Alexandre Julian, who is a famous designer. He's from the area. And if you don't remember, he designed a lot of the sweaters that were worn by Bill Cosby in the original Bill Cosby TV show. So he is a famed designer, well known for his yarn work, especially sweaters, but also stocking caps, socks, underwear made of yarn, lots of stuff. So then the team, blah, 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 yeah. All right. So their first game, which I was getting to, was on November 4th, 1988. Did they win? No, they lost to the Cavs. And that is an embarrassing thing as it is, but it was a brand new team. They redeemed themselves a little bit later. 4 days later, they beat the Los Angeles Clippers. And then they really got some excitement going when they beat the Chicago Bulls, the world-famous Chicago Bulls. A brand new team beat them 103-101. And that was the Michael Jordan Bulls, guys. It was his first comeback to basketball as a pro. Remember, he took a little break to be a jazz singer. He was playing jai-alai. He tried to become a professional explorer. He went down to South Pole as an explorer. He was up on Everest. He was doing all kinds of stuff, but finally came to his senses and came back to basketball, only to be spanked by the brand new Charlotte Hornets. So again, now they're a hit. And so all of those initial worries that the team wouldn't make it, that wouldn't grab the town's excitement, were dashed, and they were off to the races. In fact, like I said, they sold out 364 consecutive games, and they led the NBA in attendance. And they only the only team that to break their record was themselves. They broke their own record 7 more times. You see what I'm saying? Attendance records, because they had that giant stadium. And then, and again, well, let's don't oversell it. We got it. However, in the second season, just like all things in life, that second time you come out, just like stand-up comedy, you come out and all your friends are there. They cheer you on. Everybody's laughing, and you're like, I'm a hit. I'm funny. And then you come back and it's just the regulars at the bar and they're mad because you turned off their football game and now they're barely looking at you. And you're at some place that they advertise comedy night the day before, and all the drunks in the bar are just like, boo, boo. And your second time around, you're like, oh, I'm not as good as I thought. All right, that's what happened to the Hornets. Okay? And they finished second season with a 19-63 record. But hey, you gotta stick with it. This is where we separate the women from the men, the women from the girls, the men from the boys. You gotta stick with it, which they did. Okay, and then next year they had a 26-56 record, so slightly a little better. Okay, and then they picked up Larry Johnson in the '91 draft, and of course he did real good. And then the next year 31-51 record. It's getting a little better. And then they were back in the draft lottery, and they picked up, that's right, Georgetown center Alonzo Mourning. Okay, so now you have Johnson and Mourning, right? And so they finished that season 44-38, their first ever winning record, and they went to the playoffs. Huh? And not only that, they beat the Celtics in the very first round. The Celtics. But then they lost to the Knicks, and they were out. But hey, good things are happening. Then they went 41-41. The next year after that, they went 50-32, and they're sort of a middling team, right? Not great, not bad. But then they eventually traded Alonzo Mourning to the Miami Heat. They picked up Glenn Rice, and the next era. He led the team in scoring and points through the 95-96 season, and they were doing all right, but they had a 41-41 record, and then they then went to 54-28, made it back to the playoffs the next year, but they went down to the Knicks. The 97-98, they were relatively successful, let's say 51-31. And then the next year was shortened. They didn't start till February due to the lockout. They traded Glenn Rice ultimately to the Lakers, and etc. So the next 3 years, they went to the playoffs. They went to this conference semifinals twice, but they were eliminated from the 2002 playoffs. And right before that, the NBA approved a move to New Orleans. And the reason being that all of the excitement of the early years was kind of dwindled, and the attendance was way off. And also Shin, the main guy, he was just losing popularity, and it happens. So they went to, now this is where it gets a little tricky. Let's see if I can get this down. Let's see if I can get this down properly. All right, this is going to take a little bit of a little bit of homework just to get this explained properly. All right. So he went to, wow, it sounds like they went to New Orleans as the Hornets. Okay. And let's see, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, at the same time, the Vancouver Grizzlies, they went to Memphis. Now, interestingly, the Hornets also put in a bid to move to Memphis, but Vancouver got it. So, just like many owners have in the past, Shin, the owner of the Hornets, had given the city of Charlotte an ultimatum. He said, hey, unless you build me a new arena, I'm leaving town. And then, of course, the city refused, which often happens. And he was off and running and trying to get out of town. So let me see, this is where it gets kind of dicey. So then, right after the team moved to New Orleans as the New Orleans Hornets, the NBA floated the idea of an expansion team in Charlotte for 1 year, the 2004-2005 season, if they could reach a deal. And a lot of people bid for the ownership of that group, including Larry Bird, the famous Boston Celtics player. Okay. Not only that, well, several other groups, but the group that won, the winner of the franchise, was Robert L. Johnson, who owned Black Entertainment Television. And he became the first majority African American owner in major sports in the United States, major professional sports in America. Now, who was one of his co-owners? Nelly, the singer Nelly. It's getting hot in here. All right, so they called this new, potentially only 1 year team the Bobcats. And they actually had another contest in town. The winner of that contest was to name the team Flight, but Robert Johnson overruled that, and he called it the Bobcats. The same thing happened in Milwaukee. They had a contest for the Bucks, and the team didn't like the winner. You know, they have these contests, and then the town picks a winner, and then they say, no, we don't want it. Well, why do you have a contest? So ridiculous. Nice, but anyway. So he said, let's call them the Bobcats. And now some people say, oh, that's because his name was Bob. And so it's like a sort of a self-referential name, but that's kind of a stretch. And Bobcats are native to the area. There's lots of Bobcats, just like the Hornets. In fact, a lot of times you'll see Hornets riding on the back of Bobcats in the wild in North Carolina. Bobcats will be singing a song. And what do you think Disney got all those musicals? They got them from going out in the woods and watching this animals singing to each other, or just sing to express their joy of living in nature. All right, and so let's see. A new arena was started to be built in Uptown Charlotte, but they played their home games at the Coliseum, the old school Coliseum that they'd been at forever, until they had the new building ready to go. Get where I'm going? Get where I'm saying now. They had an expansion draft to get this new team, the Bobcat, going. They picked up Gerald Wallace, Jason Capono, and some others, European players. Okay. And then they traded with the LA Clippers to get a draft pick. And they also then, for their first game for 2004-2005, they lost to the Wizards 103-96. Then they beat the Magic. And so, the same kind of up and down kind of feel as the original team. But they beat the Hornets 94-93 in overtime in Charlotte. And so that was kind of fun that the Bobcats beat the Hornets and said, yeah, there you go. It's kind of like the Browns playing the Ravens, although usually the Ravens, to give you some background, what were the Browns? The Browns cut out of town to Baltimore, changed their name to the Ravens, so there's a little bad blood there. And every time they played, there was always a, kind of a extra layer of animosity. And yet the Ravens still beat the Browns, 99.9% of the time. But in this case, the Bobcats didn't do that good. 18-64. They didn't win more than 2 games in a row. Okay, and for the 2005 draft, they picked up Raymond Felton and Sean May. They opened the Charlotte Bobcats Arena finally. They beat the Celtics again with an overtime victory in that stadium. In that facility, they still struggle. They went to 26-56, which is a little bit better than their first year as the expansion Bobcats. Then shortly after that, Michael Jordan bought part of the team. He's at that time was the second largest shareholder. I don't know about now. I think he might have moved into the top spot. Not sure. They showed a little bit more improvement the next year, 2006, 2007, but then they went through a losing streak. Then the coach was let go. Bernie Bickerstaff was let go. Then they won 11 games still under his tenure, and then they finished out 33-49. And Bickerstaff was 77-169, 77 wins, 169 losses at the end of his tenure. See? So that's kind of the way it went down with the switch over there to New Orleans. And the Bobcats. But hang on, though, because it gets even crazier. I mean, I know, this is insane. This is why... That's why these teams are so fun, man, because they're the constant changing and constant. Now this is interesting too. Back in '96, there was a bunch of changes. This is just a little side interest note. Back in '96, on draft day, they made a trade to get Vlade Divac from the Los Angeles Lakers in exchange. See, so let me do it again. They let me see if I can explain this properly. They made a trade to get Vlade Divac from the Los Angeles Lakers for the rights. They gave up the rights to rookie Kobe Bryant. Okay? Because they originally picked Kobe Bryant 13th overall in that draft. But they gave up the rights to Kobe for Vlade Divac. And Kobe went to the Lakers, okay, ultimately, and never left. He played for the Lakers his whole entire career. Interesting. So, let's go back to where I was. So now we're at let's see. We talked about that. Just looking at my notes here. Yeah. So ultimately, what happened to that Charlotte Coliseum, that 240,000 seat place? They demolished it on June 3rd, 2007. And there wasn't a lot of sad faces around town. It was kind of a, it was sad in that it was where the original NBA franchise played, but there was kind of a lot of bitterness connected to it. And so I would say if you interviewed people in this city today, they would say, well, it was getting old. It didn't have very good luxury boxes. It was just an older arena, right? It was just the old school. It didn't have that modern facilities people demand, meaning corporations. So now, 2007, they picked Brendan Wright, okay, and then they traded him to Golden State and picked up Jason Richardson. But they finished that year, the 2007-2008 record, 32-50. And there's a lot of, when a team is middling like this, there's always a lot of turmoil. And there was a lot of rumors of players not getting along with the coach and internal strife, and that's pretty common. All right? Just see the Cleveland Browns. See the subnotes, see the notes below for Cleveland Browns. So ultimately, in early part of 2008, Larry Brown came on as their third coach, and then they picked up some draft picks and shamalama ding dong and finished 35-47. And then right after that, Bob Johnson said, "I'm going to sell the team." So Michael Jordan came in and became a large owner of the team. Let's see. Jordan picked it up. The announcement was on February 27, 2010. And on April 9th, 2010, maybe just based on that, the Bobcats got their first playoff berth since 2002. Okay? 44-38 that year. See? So Michael Jordan, just buying the team was influencing them. First ever winning season for the Bobcats. But they were knocked out, bing, see ya, by the Orlando Magic It only took 4 games, and they were gone ski. But then that was the beginning of the end of the Bobcats. The Bobcats lasted till 2014, okay? And so then what happened? This is like a mini-series, and now we're coming into the final night of the mini-series. The Hornets came back. Jordan announced that he had applied to change the name from the Bobcats to the Hornets. Of course, this all has to be approved by the NBA. And the NBA said then shortly after that it had approved it. Right? And they unveiled a new logo and a whole new thing. They became the Hornets again. So you're saying, well, what about New Orleans? Well, by that time, the New Orleans became the Pelicans because they tried to pick the most non-threatening animal, the most. I'm gonna get a bunch of emails. Pelicans are fierce, dude. The Pelicans, the Hornets in New Orleans became the Pelicans. The renamed Hornets then were able to retain the history and the records of their original years, 1988 through 2002. Okay. Well, the time that they were in New Orleans, when they were the Hornets in New Orleans, their history and records, those stayed with their new name, the Pelicans. So they were Hornets in New Orleans from 2002 to 2013. All of those records became the history and legacy of the Pelicans. If you look at this whiteboard on the wall, I've written it all down with these arrows pointing, and I have several dotted lines. And I put push pins into the board with colored yarn that shows the history. And I think it's pretty simple. You get the idea. So, all right. So now here we go. 2014, brand new logo. Let's go. Let's go Hornets. All right. And they picked up Lance Stevenson from the Pacers. They picked up Marvin Williams from the Hawks. Blah, blah, blah. Next year, they improved to 48-34. Picked up Jeremy Lin, Nicholas Batum, B-A-T-U-M. And that was the best season in franchise history right there. They went back to the playoffs, and then they lost to the Heat. 7 games, though. Now, in the offseason after that, Jeremy Lin went to the Brooklyn Nets and a lot of other changes. And ultimately, the Hornets finished that year with 36-46 records, missed out of the playoffs. But the next year, very successful. They were the 41st pick in the draft, and they shipped several players and the 41st pick in the draft to the Hawks to pick up Dwight Howard. There you go. Now Howard is back with Steve Clifford, the head coach, and because they had been together in both LA and Orlando. And then they picked up some other players you wouldn't recognize. Shamalama Ding Dong. Next year, 2017-18, Kemba Walker was named to the NBA All-Star game, his second time. And at the end of the season, the Hornets did not pick up the contract of general manager Rich Cho, and they named Mitch Kupchak the new president and GM. All right, and then very shortly after that, they have fired the head coach. That's how it comes down. And they put in James Borrego. That's when you're the head coach and they named the new president and GM, and you start looking at around your office like, how many boxes will I need to pack up my stuff? Because that's often the case. And let me see, blah, 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 blah. So there you go. That's kind of the big picture of the history of, I mean, isn't that wild? Just the whole New Orleans situation, it was just crazy. And I just find that the fact that it came back all the way to Charlotte, and they made the effort to get the old name back, and then it all worked out. And with this Charlotte Coliseum, which a lot of people called the Hive, right? Get it? Not only with this 240,000 seats, but just the fact that it was the home, their original home. A lot of nostalgia there, and I would have been down there shooting video of it just to get some. If I had gone to those initial games, I'm the kind of person that would want to get some video of the stadium being torn down, because I just have that nostalgic bone in my body, guys. That's roughly what Charlotte Hornets are all about. We're going to have so much more on this great city. We're going to talk about other sports. We're going to look at music. And we're going to interview people on the street. So come back with us for so much more all this week on week 2 of our coverage of Charlotte, North Carolina. As usual, this is a parody channel, and most of this stuff I made up off the top of my head. Come on back.